Welcome to Caribbean Bridges. I'm Julian Rogers, and I'm in Kingston, Jamaica. And we continue our salute to Caribbean women at the very top of their game. The appointment of Dr. Carla Barnett as the next Secretary General to the Caribbean community has been warmly received. And so we here on Caribbean Bridges extend our salute to many more of the women who are serving at the highest offices, both here at home and abroad. And in this edition, we look at women at the top, handling trade negotiations, tackling economic development issues, and conducting diplomacy on our behalf. And as usual, when I do these shows, I tell you, some people are my friends and some people are my immediate friends. In other words, yes, we just became friends in the last couple of days as we talked about appearing in this program. But here's where I'm going to start with a friend of mine. We go back to the university days, and I don't want you to tell her that, that's a matter of age counting, etc. Let's go simply and say that Gail Maturin is our negotiator in trade matters on behalf of the Caribbean community. Her official title is Ambassador Gail Maturin, Director General, Office of Trade Negotiations, Caribbean Community Secretariat. And she is in Bridgetown, Barbados. Welcome, Gail.
Hi, Julian. Good to be with you, and thank you so much for including me in Caribbean Bridges. Before we go any further, let me just offer my warmest congratulations to Dr. Carla Barnett on her appointment as Secretary General of the Caribbean Community, an appointment well deserved. Very proud that a woman is finally heading the Regional Integration Secretariat, and I am confident that under her guidance, the region will continue to make progress. It's going to be a difficult few years for us in light of the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, but I am confident that she will lead with wisdom and great expertise given her wide experience. So enough respect, Dr. Barnett, and congratulations and best wishes.
Have you had a chance to work with her before, or is this a new thing?
No, I've never directly worked with her. She was Deputy Secretary General at a time when I was sitting on the other side of the fence, and I was covering CARICOM issues, but we never worked together directly. But of course, she left a very good legacy in the Secretariat, and I know that colleagues within the Secretariat are very much looking forward to her coming on board.
Thank you, Gail. And we'll talk more about your work a little later on. And in fact, we want to trace your own progress to the position you now hold. Well, let me go to New York and introduce you to somebody who has become a friend of mine in the last, 72 hours or so? At least that's the way it feels.
Yeah, about that. Yeah. See how quickly you can make friends?
I'm telling you. Let me tell you, this is Ambassador Missouri Sherman Peter. She's originally from the Bahamas, but she is our permanent observer at the United Nations. And boy, I have to thank Valerie Aline for introducing me to her and to starting this friendship. So welcome, Missouri.
Thank you so very much. Mr. Rogers, I told you that my parents says to say Mr. until somebody says you may call me by name. And well, you haven't said that.
Friend, so you can call me Julian.
You're now Julian. Julian, yes. I wish to thank you kindly for inviting me to Caribbean Bridges, Women at the Top, and particularly to this salute for Dr. Carla Barnett. The news that Carla from Belize had been selected by CARICOM heads as Secretary General to succeed Secretary General Ivan LaRoque, who has given 2 terms of exemplary service to the community, ushered in an historic milestone for the CARICOM region. I am profoundly congratulating our incoming Secretary General on her appointment, recognizing the impressive first that she brings to her high office. I believe, knowing Carla, that she was prepared for a time like this. One needs only look at her exemplary biography to know how qualified she is to take us into these critical times for our community and as well for the global community. I proudly state that I know Dr. Barnett from her service to CARICOM as Deputy Secretary General. I remember her as a confident, productive, and positive woman DSG with admirable work ethics, a great communicator, and a firm believer in our community of small states, deeply committed to our region and to multilateralism. So I take this opportunity with thanks to say to Dr. Barnett today, congratulations on your impressive accomplishments from which CARICOM will now benefit. Congratulations for becoming CARICOM's first woman Secretary General. Thank you for the leadership you will provide to our community. It will be my privilege to work with you as CARICOM's permanent observer to the United Nations, and I stand ready to support you in any way I can. Congratulations, Carla.
In Jamaica, that's what we call talkative. Thank you very much, Ambassador. Let's go down to Trinidad, to Port of Spain now. And this next personality is Diane Corliss. She's director of the United Nations Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean. And she's there in the sub-regional office in Port of Spain. My connection with her is that one of her sister is a long-standing friend of mine. We taught at the university in summer program, etc. And it's only many years later that I discover that Diane is a sister of Hillary Brown, who's also at the CARICOM Secretariat in Georgetown. These are unbelievable Caribbean connections. Welcome, Diane.
Thank you, Julian. So good to see you. Wonderful to be here. And thanks for inviting me. And I just want to join my two colleagues and friends in celebrating finally a woman leading CARICOM. It's been a long time coming, long overdue, and we will celebrate when Carla makes her triumphant return to CARICOM in Georgetown. And I have known Carla for decades. She's a colleague and friend, and most recently she was very actively involved with us in the Secretary General, UN Secretary General's Financing for Development consultations that were held under the chairmanship of Jamaica and Canada last year. Actually, they're still ongoing, but Carla was one of the few Caribbean countries, well, representing Belize, one of the few of the countries that was very actively engaged in addressing those critical issues of financing and for development, recognizing the impact that COVID had on across the board on all of the economies of the Caribbean. And I think that it is an excellent time for us to have an economist who has honed her skills in financial management, expenditure management, debt management, debt restructuring. These are critical issues across the board for all of the Caribbean that were facing these challenges before, and these challenges have now been trebled with the impact of COVID on our mostly tourism-dependent economies. We are going to need Carla there with her expertise to work along with organizations such as my own ECLAC in discerning how we shape a strategy to take the region out of its box of bricks. I cannot express how extremely gratified I am to have Carla at the helm at such a critical time in the life of our region. Welcome, Carla. You can count on me and my team here in Port of Spain to give fullest support going forward for our region.
Thank you very much, Diane, on behalf of Carla. I'm sure that all these messages of support will reach her in Belmopan or Belize City, wherever she is in Belize itself. Let me go back to Gail. And in fact, I did say to all three ladies that I want them to talk about their own development and progress towards the positions they now hold. Gives us an opportunity to understand, one, where they come from in all our Caribbean families, and to really also look at some of the highlights of their development. I know that they're all not too eager to boast, but I'm still going to press them to really open up, because I think people across this Caribbean must understand the caliber of people we have running critical institutions. So let me go to Gail first. And I did tell you that I was at university with her back in the 70s, but she was at university before that and has done a number of things in terms of her diplomatic experience and so on. And she comes from I would say, from a family of diplomats. So let's start, Gail, with Jamaica as your island home first.
Well, thanks, Julian. But let me, just before I go there, salute the other two ladies who are on the program with me today. I'm very pleased to be a co-participant with them. I'm very pleased to see them because, as I suspect you will discover in our conversation today, we all have linkages through the University of the West Indies, Mona campus. We have linkages through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Foreign Trade Jamaica, and we have linkages as serving diplomats of CARICOM countries. So it's great to catch up with both Missouri and Diane today, as well as, of course, with you. Yes, Julian, we were at university together in the 70s. At that time, I thought I was going to make a career in media, follow your steps. I was at university earlier, and that was when I first met Missouri. Diane, I think, was a little behind me at university, but I certainly got to know Diane very well when we were both in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. After making some use of that diploma in mass communications, and remember, Julian, I think we were the guinea pig year.
Yes, we certainly were.
First year, we were the first set of students doing that diploma.
Yeah.
And it was quite an experience because I think I was the only non-practicing journalist in the group. And so a number of well-known journalists, well-respected in their field, all turned up at the Mona campus to do this diploma, and it was just an excellent exposure. And of course, I made good friendships then, which continue today. After that, I spent a few years working in media or communication-related issues, and then decided to put in an application to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the late 70s. I was accepted, and I spent the next 30 years there. So I think that's it in a nutshell.
I knew you would find a way in which to make it short, Gail. But you served in many places. So just quickly, you've been at the UN, am I correct?
Yes, I did a posting in New York to the UN in United Nations. And in fact, I think Diane and I overlapped for a few months in that post. Yes, I think we did, right? Yeah. I served in Brussels, which is probably where I was first exposed to the CARICOM trade agenda. I also, I served in Trinidad. How could I forget?
Yes, how could you? Carnival.
I served in Trinidad and Tobago, and anyone who knows me would know that I thoroughly enjoyed that posting. Apart from helping to strengthen Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago bilateral relations, I fully immersed myself in the cultural offerings of the Twin Republic. And it was a wonderful experience.
There's only one word for that, Gail: carnival.
No. I think that sells Trinidad and Tobago short. There's the cultural scene in Trinidad and Tobago is wide ranging. It's much more than carnival. Although carnival in and of itself is special, but it really is a vibrant, innovative, musical. I mean, Diane is a musician, and I'm sure she shares that view. Incredibly musical society. Anyway, let me not. And then I was back home for a while. I then went, I think it was to Washington, D.C., and I went back home for a while. And then I went to United Kingdom and then on to Geneva. I came back home, I think it was 2008, as permanent secretary. And then a year later, when I came home in 2008, I expected to unpack my bags finally, and settle down and basically end my career there. But a year later, I was approached about joining the CARICOM Secretariat, head the Office of Trade Negotiations, and I am still there.
So that's the current assignment, and we'll talk more about that particular work that you're doing right now on behalf of the Caribbean community, Gail. But thanks very much for giving us a good sense of the things you've done and the things you've enjoyed serving across this Caribbean. Let me go to Sherman Peter, and just make sure you don't add an S to the Peter. And of course, come back to Missouri. Missouri is at the United Nations in New York. And we met a couple of days ago, and she's got so many stories to tell, but I'm going to ask her to tell those parts of the story that can only be made public.
Thank you, Julian. Well, may I begin by saying that I am an accidental diplomat. As the independence of the Bahamas approached, the government made a decision that young people with A's or B's in their A levels will be given a scholarship so that they could build a cadre of educated people, so to speak. You, of course, called your shots when you were leaving. This is the ministry that I want to work in. And then you go off and you come back and you work for the government for the same amount of time that you have studied. I came back anxious and ready to go into the Ministry of Education, to which I was bonded, when a gentleman, men pick good leaders too, I guess, Mr. Julian, I guess, my ministers, two of them, the Minister of Finance, to whom I would have had to pay back my money if I didn't take the deal, and the Minister of Foreign Affairs. And I was like, what am I doing here? I'm supposed to be doing education. Have you ever seen a Bahamian adult look at a child when they open their mouth and they should have kept it shut? I got one of those looks from both men. And 2 days later, I was in the Bahamas mission to the United Nations. That's the amount of time they gave me to report. My job was to set up the Bahamas mission to the United Nations post-independence. We were just coming out of independence. Lucille Mayer, did you meet Gail? She's her mother. Took me in hand because at UWI, where they educated me, and I don't care what universities I've gone to since then, I always say UWI educated me, was my warden in Seacole and was Jamaica's deputy permanent representative to the UN when I arrived in New York. She took me in hand when I said to her, what does a mission do? She looked at my distress, brought me into the Jamaica mission for 2 weeks, and ran me through the machinations and work of the mission, and then sent me back to establish the Bahamas mission to the UN. 2 years later, because I guess I must have done a good job, the same gentleman came back to me and said, I have decided who's going to be the first consul general of the Bahamas at New York. And I said, who, sir? He said, you. And he says, now you will establish the Consulate General of the Bahamas. I established the Consulate General of the Bahamas. And then 2 years later, the same gentleman said, you have a multilateral personality, so I'm sending you to the UN. So off I went to the UN, working simultaneously as Consul General and delegate to the UN. They never did that again, by the way. And, and either I discouraged them or scared them, I don't know which. I stayed in the mission to the UN for as deputy permanent representative to the United Nations, working in women's affairs and primarily in crime prevention, criminal justice. As you remember, at the time, all of our small countries were being accused of being drug traffickers and so on. It was really a sad time, and a sad time for the Bahamas. I suggested to the same gentleman that we join the Commission on Narcotic Drugs. He said, yeah, okay, bye. And off I went to Vienna to be the Bahamas' representative in the Commission on Narcotic Drugs for 12 years, while simultaneously serving as permanent representative. At that point, the Bahamas decided it wanted to see some of its nationals in intergovernmental organizations. We were not going into the actual multilateral system in that way. And so they picked 3 of us, all women, and we all went our separate ways. I went to the Commonwealth Secretariat as the Assistant Director of Political Affairs. That is when I knew that no matter what happened in my life, I confirmed I would always be a CARICOM person and a regional person. CARICOM underpinned my work with data, with statistics, with anything that I wanted, especially when I was given the responsibility of updating the Small States Report. After I'd been at the Commonwealth only to do my contract, I was brought back to the Bahamas to be the High Commissioner to Canada, simultaneously with the High Commissioner to Zimbabwe. Very close countries, you know, next door to each other. And so I presented the credentials to Comrade Mugabe in State House in Harare and to Mr. Chrétien in Canada, and moved between the 2 countries. And then my work in restructuring started. The government brought me back to restructure the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and to work with the Office of the Attorney General with blacklisting. Small detail, they made me do both. So I was permanent secretary in the Office of the Attorney General and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. At that point, CARICOM called again. I became chef de cabinet to the President of the General Assembly, a wonderful, wonderful event with Mr. Julian Robert Hunt as president and his entire cabinet comprised of CARICOM persons who had been loaned by their governments, including Ambassador Colin Granderson, who was loaned by CARICOM Secretariat. And then I moved back from there, brought back to the Bahamas, restructuring again, this time the Ministry of National Security, because I had been for all my life. I was the items officer for the International Criminal Court as a high-level expert for the UN. And so police force, defense force, prison services. And then I was moved out to set up this infrastructure for trafficking in persons and to do the guidelines for that. And then I came up with this incredible idea that I was going to resign. I was going to retire. And my prime minister told me, I have your file in front of me. I know how old you are. So you're not really eligible for retirement. And so now you will now be for the Ministry of National Security, you will be their chief advisor, and you will get the National Anti-Drug Plan written. And so I said, okay. And then I tried again, and he says, okay, you can go again if you take another appointment as a consultant. So I took that one. And during that time, I went to Trinidad and Tobago as an alum rep on the selection of the new Vice Chancellor of the University of the West Indies. A car came up to the hotel where I was and said, Ambassador Lorock, let's wishes to speak to you. We will take you to Impacts to speak to him. And as I walked out, and 2 days later, I was in the Bahamas mission to the UN. As I walked out of Impacts, 2 days later, I was CARICOM permanent observer. A job and that is where I am now. Again, always there's a CARICOM switch to my story, always. You just have to look for it. And I am pleased to have served under Ambassador Lorock. I really, really appreciated him taking me on board and working with me. I wish him the absolute best as we take on our first female Secretary General.
Wow.
Thank you.
You know, I have to tell you, right? In the conversations I've had with Ambassador, I told her that really and truly, her personal story is great for a film, and now that you hear the work that she's done in the diplomatic field for this entire Caribbean, that's another film by itself. But Hey, anybody who wants to do the script writing screenplay on that one, give me a call first because I think I can help you with that one.
Yeah, you should
Hey.
also know that I've worked in 106 countries and territories in the world during that.
You're not just CARICOM,
Yeah.
you're United Nations. Hey, let's go to Diane. Diane, I don't want you to I don't want you to feel any lesser because of this tremendous story. But I want to make a point here to the audience. I just realized that I have assembled three ladies from the Northern Caribbean because Diane is also from Jamaica as well, where I am. So Diane, let's hear your story, and I hope.
Oh, I thought you were going to say that you have assembled three ladies who have been grounded in the diplomatic service, which in fact we all have had very
There,
significant careers in
there you go.
in the foreign service.
Let
And
me say then I've assembled three women who've been grounded in the University of the West Indies, in the
Yes.
diplomatic service, and who
Mhm.
are real CARICOM citizens.
Absolutely. And I share with Carla, we are both graduates of the Consortium Graduate School, which was I was there with the late great Norman Gervin. He really helped to shape my vision and perspective on what we need to do in the Caribbean. I really enjoyed those years at the CGS. Um, I want to pay tribute before I even tell my story to the two dynamic ladies, and my story, can't begin to compare with theirs. I want to share, it's to say how pleased I am to be with them. They don't even realize the extent to which they influenced the early trajectory of my own path when I joined the foreign ministry. Gail, and I have to say that I find that journalists make excellent diplomats. I think it's their command of language and messaging. Gail was a tall, willowy, elegant style icon in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs that I was, totally in awe of, with the wit and the command of the messaging. That was in my early 2 years at Foreign Affairs before I went to New York at age 23 as an ingenue as first secretary in New York, and I was swept up by a force of nature in the name of Missouri Sherman Peter. She was the one who introduced me to Brooklyn. I didn't know Brooklyn until Missouri took me there. I know she doesn't even remember.
Yes.
I was a young foreign service officer, completely green, first time living on my own. Always lived in my parents' house until I was sent to New York. And if I didn't have Missouri in those days, telling me the facts of life, how you survive in the big city. I have to tell you, separate and apart from, experience as a foreign service officer, it was about life and living. And I have to say that that's an important part of my story. The importance of the sisterhood, of being able to depend on other women, be they my mentors, like my ambassador Durant, my current boss, Alicia Barcelona, my own mother, who was the first permanent secretary in the Jamaican public service. A force to be reckoned with, like Gail's mother, who was an extremely important source of inspiration for me. I think that has been an extremely important part of the confidence that I developed in my career. So I went to New York as first secretary at age 23, and spent 5 years there, and then was swept down to OAS. I was what they considered at that time a multilateral. They had bilateral and multilateral diplomats, and I was basically honed as a multilateral one. So I left from New York at the UN, where I was in the second committee, again with another brilliant journalist turned diplomat in Ransford Smith, who really helped to develop my negotiating skills while I was in New York. I went down to Washington, D.C. To the OAS, where again, I did economic and social development. I chaired for 4 years there a committee on the economic and social problems of the small states of the Caribbean. And that was when I really started, becoming interested. Well, no, even before that, because I did international relations at the University of the West Indies undergrad. And it was the course that Richard Burnell taught in Caribbean economic problems that really fired my interest in Caribbean integration and in addressing the challenges of our sub-region. And when I went to Washington, D.C., I got more caught up in that. So when I returned to Kingston after my stint at New York, at Washington, D.C., I went back to the CGS. That's when I did the graduate school to CGS, and I fell in the arms of Norman Gervin, God bless him, and that was really where I became fully aware of. I think it was in '94 that they had the small states, the Barbados Program of Action. So this was after that in '96, and so I was hearing about the SIDS agenda, and the whole question of sustainable development was now becoming topical, and that became then my mantra. I went back to the ministry and said, guys, we need to get involved with this. And I went back to New York. I went back then as the deputy permanent representative of Jamaica to the United Nations. So I did 2 separate stints in New York. And it was there that I became the vice chair of the process. It was an international process on the sustainable development, Johannesburg, a program of action that they were negotiating, and a whole sustainable development platform. I was vice chair along with Brazil. And it was during that process that I caught the attention of the head of the Division for Sustainable Development in DESA, the Department of Economic and Social Affairs. And she invited me to apply for the position of chief of the Small Island Developing States unit. I didn't really want to leave. I didn't want to leave the Foreign Service, but on the very last day, I sent in the application, and that's the story of how I ended up in the UN. I spent 6 years as the chief of SIDS, responsible for all 43 small island states across the United Nations, and those were really exhilarating years. And then I did 2 years in partnerships, which then opened another area of opportunity for me. The importance, increasingly so, for the middle-income countries of the Caribbean. Partnerships, because you're not getting any resources concessionally anymore. We are going to survive on the way in which we pursue partnerships. So with my background now in SIDS and partnerships, I got shipped to Port of Spain. And I have been a part of the ECLAC family ever since, for nearly 10 years now. And it has been the challenge and the privilege of a lifetime. And it's not really an exciting tale, but for me, a very, very rewarding one.
I have to tell you that you may think it's not exciting, but it was exciting to hear you walk through all those opportunities that you've had and that you've taken up as they became available. And I think it's a great lesson for young people watching the Caribbean Bridges and understanding exactly hard work, persistence, taking out opportunities that come to you, etc. Let me remind you, this is Caribbean Bridges. I'm Julian Rogers. I'm in Kingston, Jamaica, and we're talking to women who are at the top of their game, as they say, women at the top. Our second salute to mark the appointment of Dr. Carla Barnett as the next Secretary General of the Caribbean Community. Let me go back now to New York and to Ambassador Sherman Peter there. She's given you a whole sense of how she arrived at this particular position, etc. But I want you, Ambassador, to talk about your current assignment, how long you've been in this position, for instance, and what you've been able to do, and let's talk about the future, etc. But let's talk about the present first of all. What's a day in your life at the UN like?
Let's start by looking at what a CARICOM permanent observer does. I say, in short, that the CARICOM permanent observer is the conduit through which the CARICOM Secretary General and the CARICOM Secretariat manages its relationships across the United Nations. This position comes with an agreement between the Secretariat and the United Nations for CARICOM to participate in the work of the United Nations General Assembly and related organizations. In my position, I answer to two absolutely incredible persons, or work closely with, whatever, Ambassador Colin Powell and Colin Powell. My goodness gracious me.
Grandison.
No, Grandison is certainly in my viewpoint. Yeah, I'd rather have worked with Colin. Colin Grandison, Ambassador Colin Grandison, who is head of the Directorate for Foreign and Community Relations, and Valerie, his special advisor. And I thank them, I take this opportunity to thank them for all the incredible things that they do for CARICOM, and actually for underpinning my work at the United Nations. The job of the permanent observer is very multifaceted, because you're dealing with the UN, you're dealing with, you're coordinating. And if I could just go through the principal groups and persons that you communicate with as the CARICOM permanent observer. I would say firstly, the CARICOM Caucus of Permanent Representatives to the United Nations. That is our 14 member states. They rotate a chairman through them, and it is through them that we communicate, we cooperate, we consult, moving forward the work of our region at the United Nations. The CARICOM Permanent Observer supports the CARICOM Caucus of Permanent Representatives to the UN. The CARICOM office also communicates with the UN agencies and others with which CARICOM has business. UNDP, for example. It also advances issues that need to be advanced between the United Nations and CARICOM. For example, if we are having our caucus meeting, our CARICOM ambassadors select issues requiring the consultancy with the COFCOR and write briefs for those matters. Those briefs pass through the hands of the CARICOM permanent observers to these meetings. The Secretary General of the United Nations, for example, participates in the CARICOM Heads of Government meeting more often than not. Actually putting that together is something the permanent observer does. The actual persons from CARICOM who come to meetings, so all of the UN agencies and of such, the Commission on the Status of Women and so on and so forth, those things that are important to the CARICOM, they send experts from CARICOM to New York to cover those meetings. I will accompany those experts as necessary, but I would also register them so that they are then participating in the UN as CARICOM representatives. There is a biennial meeting held every year between CARICOM institutions and the Secretariat and the United Nations system. The document that comes from that meeting every 2 years actually informs the cooperation of the two sides for the coming year and is the subject of a United Nations resolution. And so both in planning for the meeting and after the meeting and in the context of preparing the resolution, the CARICOM permanent observer is actively involved with the CARICOM Secretariat and with the United Nations as well. Bodies that CARICOM ordinarily would sit on, the CARICOM will sit on that body for CARICOM under instructions from the Secretariat. The one that pops to mind always for me is the Steering Committee on the Remember Slavery Committee. The Remember Slavery program of the United Nations is underpinned by the Caribbean community. And every year on the 25th of March, there's an event in the General Assembly to remember slavery, the racism that has persisted, the legacy of it, and how to move on from here. I sit on that committee. That committee takes you, as many of the things that you do as CARICOM permanent observer, it takes you outside of the ambit of the United Nations at times. There are schools, there are NGOs, there are universities who will ask the CARICOM permanent observer to come and speak about the region generally. I've lectured in Medgar Evers College, for example, in the New School University and so on. And these are things that you do basically on behalf of the Secretariat outside of the UN. If the Secretary General is invited to speak, or Ambassador Grandison, and is unable to do so, I will deliver the statement of the Secretary General to whatever body he would ordinarily have spoken on. If there are meetings, for example, when we had the problem of the hurricanes and we were setting up a pledging conference, I would be forefront and center with CARICOM and the UN setting up those kinds of conferences. In addition, a lot of the UN agencies work through me because much of what happens, whether it's from the caucus to the Secretariat or from the Secretariat to the caucus, passes through the office of the CARICOM Permanent Observer. So if the Secretary General is having a meeting and he's inviting my Secretary General, that will come through my office. Oftentimes, offers made to us by third parties, whether they are now interested in CARICOM and they want to have closer relationships with CARICOM, those matters also pass through. If they're offering training to CARICOM, those offers will go also through the CARICOM Permanent Observer. For example, I work very closely now with the LDC's SIDS Trust Fund, which brings our countries, our small countries who would not ordinarily have missions in Geneva or would not ordinarily come to Geneva to hear the Human Rights Council and have their voices heard. Because they had a workshop for small states in the 4 regions, the first one was CARICOM, so I was the Rapporteur General of the CARICOM workshop. And since then, I've been on board for all of the succeeding workshops. I've been to the one in Pacific also, and recently we had African ones. There are, for a long time, and this is a story that I think is important to tell, for a long time, the CARICOM Permanent Observers, as Gail would know, and Dan would know, functioned out of home offices. Recently, through our relations with the Commonwealth Secretariat and Valerie's insistence and very, very hard work, the SG is now the first Secretary General to preside over an actual CARICOM office to the United Nations that stands 2 blocks away from the United Nations. We thank the Commonwealth for that. And it makes our work a whole lot easier now. We can bring in people when the Secretary General visits. He has a place that can meet high-level persons in his office. We can do the things that we do with the caucus, because I should let you know the caucus has an entire list of things that the Permanent Observer does with the caucus, including moving documents back and forth. And this is my opportunity to compliment FCR, not because I work with them, but they are the promptest people in setting up experts to help, because as you know, you may know or may not know, many of the statements that are made at the United Nations, a number of them are made as joint CARICOM statements. And in that case, there will be intervention from the Secretary to make sure that the information from the region is actually given. Matters that the UN will come to discuss, there are several, but one of them that has come to our attention most recently is the number of CARICOM persons engaged in the Secretariat. And so there is exchange with the UN on that. And also at the UN now, and generally in the community generally, there is a closer building of relationships between the Africa Union and CARICOM. There is AFCAR at the United Nations New York. The persons who coordinate this is Ambassador Keisha Maguire of Grenada on our behalf, and Botswana on behalf of the African groups, where we're now coming to cooperate closely to see how our agendas, our mutual agendas, can be forwarded in the UN and how can go forward to the UN. And just to close up, because I've said a lot, report writing. It's something that that the FCR takes quite seriously. And so that you keep the organization always on board with what our incredible ambassadors are doing, and they are doing incredible things at the UN. And I am so privileged to be working with them. Thank you, Julian.
And we're very privileged to have you in that position and working with so many outstanding people. I'm so happy that you gave a salute to Dr. Gervin and also to Dr. Richard Brunel, of course, who is here in Kingston, Jamaica. And we're working on putting together a new program featuring Richard Brunel called Diplomatic Front. Look out for that. That's coming soon. Let's turn the subject now to the trade matters and bring Gail Maturin back in here and give you, Gail, an opportunity to talk about the kind of work that is going on right now. And by the way, I'd like each of you at some point to make reference to the fact that you now have to do so many meetings virtually. So Gail, let's talk trade.
Thanks, Julian. Yes, this virtual world that we have found ourselves in has taken some adjustment. But let me just say that from the perspective of my office, because we are part of the CARICOM Secretariat, but not based in Georgetown, we have always worked remotely because we have very, very close links with our colleagues in Georgetown, and we've always used the technology to communicate. So in a sense, adjusting to the remote working that the COVID-19 pandemic has occasioned has been probably less of a major adjustment for those of us in Barbados, and we also have a small office in Jamaica, than it has been for others. That having said, there is a limit to how many Zoom meetings you can attend and remain compos mentis. Okay, the mandate of the Office of Trade Negotiations is to coordinate CARICOM's external trade policy, and this is driven by the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas, which really mandates CARICOM member states conduct a common external trade policy. And so my office manages that process. I hope that you're going to be able to edit because I'm about to cough. So if you mute me, I'd appreciate that.
Feel free to have a twig, so to speak. It's all right. You're off camera, and we can see exactly when you're relieved and can come right back in. So there we are. Then welcome back, Gail.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yes, so as I said, the mandate of my office, and this is set out essentially in the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas, is to coordinate CARICOM's external trade policy. And there's a certain logic to that. We have a single market, so that we have common rules of origin, we have common customs duties, we have common practices with regard to services, etc. And therefore, in order to preserve the integrity of those arrangements, there's a certain logic in us pursuing a common external trade policy. We actually coordinate negotiations, trade negotiations, and let me say that these negotiations, of course, in the past, the main output of the office which preceded the OTN, the then CRNM, was of course the Economic Partnership Agreement with Europe. And that included not only the CARICOM member states, but also the Dominican Republic, hence the CARIFORUM construction. That was a major negotiation which the region undertook in the second half of the 2000s. We have not undertaken any other trade negotiation of that magnitude, but we are also responsible for managing the existing trade agreements which CARICOM has with a number of countries in the wider Caribbean, the Dominican Republic, Cuba, Costa Rica, and Colombia and Venezuela. And we're responsible for the management of those agreements. And what I have learned is that in the whole process of implementing these agreements, you are in constant negotiation because you're trying to improve the terms, you're trying to modernize the terms of these agreements, and that leads to negotiation, obviously with the third country involved. And very important, and my own view is that it's going to take on even greater importance in the next couple of years, if not starting this year, is going to be the World Trade Organization. CARICOM has a mixed view about the WTO in terms of some of the actions that have been taken in the past and the economic impact that it has had. But at the same time, CARICOM, and I think what Missouri outlined, reflects that strongly held principle. CARICOM is a strong believer in the multilateral system. We're small states, and we really do believe in a rule-based system because it helps with predictability, and it helps in terms of of ensuring that we're not operating in a jungle. And so the work of the World Trade Organization is particularly important to CARICOM. Now, over the last few years, there hasn't been much activity except in relation to negotiations on fishery subsidies. Is what CARICOM is very actively involved with that. That, in fact, is one of the Sustainable Development Goals. 2030, the completion of a multilateral agreement which would control fishery subsidies, which would also control illegal and unreporting fishing. And you may know that our waters around the Caribbean, we have quite a bit of unregulated and illegal fishing take place. We have an interest in seeing a global regime that would address some of these problems. So we've been actively involved in those negotiations. But equally important, and we're talking about women, the WTO just a few months ago appointed the first female director general from Nigeria, a very dynamic woman, and it is quite clear that under her leadership, the activity, the energy in the WTO is going to increase over the next few years. Particularly important for CARICOM at this time because issues that are important to us relate to special and differential treatment for small vulnerable economies. That's been a difficult issue for us in the WTO. In recent years, some of the major powers have questioned its validity. It's clear that we're going to have to be very focused and very clear in making our case for continued special and differential treatment. And I think that the COVID-19 pandemic and its impact on the region which has been a clear expose of our vulnerabilities, will ironically make that case a little more strongly. So there's going to be the issue of ensuring that WTO multilateral rules recognize special and differential treatment, particularly for small vulnerable economies. There's the whole issue of WTO reform, of which special and differential treatment will be part of that. There is also going to be work on the digital agenda, which again, the COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted how important that is for the region. And in fact, what we are doing today is part of that. But look at how much business commercial activity was conducted and continues to be conducted digitally as a result of the pandemic. And there are regulatory elements that need to be put in place to strengthen consumer protection, to improve payment procedures, etc., to protect data. All of these issues are being discussed in the WTO, and we have an interest in ensuring that our concerns and our interests are recognized. So over the coming years, I see more activity at the multilateral trading trade level, and I see therefore a greater need for CARICOM to be more actively involved in those discussions, those debates.
Excellent. Gail, thank you very much. Let me go to Diane back in Port of Spain. I've got, what, 4 minutes left. So I'm going to ask Diane to be very tight in explaining the kind of work that she's undertaking right now at UNECLAC.
ECLAC, of course, is the regional commission. There are 5 of them in the United Nations, all given responsibility for promoting economic and social development, which we have now evolved into sustainable development. So we are responsible for the sustainable development of Latin America and the Caribbean. So the sub-regional office, my office, responsible for the Caribbean in particular. We have responsibility for 26 countries, member states, all CARICOM, as well as associate members. So we have Bermuda, Turks and Caicos, Anguilla, Martinique, Guadeloupe, which is where I met you, Julian, a couple of years ago. And we promote a broad, multidisciplinary program of development across all of these countries. We are the think tank of the region. We do most of the research and analysis. We produce at least one economic overview on the status of the region every year. We produce a document we call the Caribbean Outlook that gives a comprehensive analysis of what is happening. We did one last year on the impact of COVID. Lots of analysis that we have done on the impact of COVID across a number of different sectors. We are in particular have an extremely strong multidisciplinary staff, somewhere in the region of about 50 persons with responsibilities in economic, social, gender, environment, energy, the gamut, IT. And we do research. Last Christmas, at the end, it was the end of the biennium, I was editing 19 different research papers that we needed to get in before the end of the year on issues ranging the whole gamut. One of the particular challenges that we face, we're responsible for sustainable development, the SDGs, implementation of SDGs. So we do that for the region. So we monitor the progress of the member states in implementation of SDGs, strengthening infrastructure to ensure that the countries have the capacity to deal with those SDGs. We're implementing a huge regional program next year on tourism. How do we rescue the tourism industry? Diversification of the tourism industry, as well as diversification of economies as a whole, in order to rescue the countries post-COVID. We do damage and loss assessment. We have a methodology that we use to assess the impact. We've done all of the damage and loss assessments in the Bahamas over the past 5 years. We will do work at the request of member states. So, for example, the yachting policy that we did for St. Kitts and Nevis. And one of our big projects right now that I am looking forward to engaging with Carla on, and the CARICOM Secretariat, the Debt for Climate Adaptation Swap Initiative, where we want to ensure that the debt of the countries can somehow be translated into resources, put in a resilience fund and invested instead in resilience building. So it is addressing what we think are 2 critical issues of the region, debt and vulnerability, linking the 2 in order to find a meaningful response for the Caribbean. Lots of work to be done in the Caribbean, and we're in the middle of it.
Dan, I'm telling you, I'm just my head's going a little spinning and saying, "Wow, there's so much work being done." But I'm happy to say you have 50 people working with you at least. It's not all left to you.
No,
hey, this has been a great time. I really enjoyed having Gail, Missouri, and Diane up here with us here on Caribbean Bridges. Thank you very much so. And the best of luck to you in all your assignments on behalf of the Caribbean community. I'm Julian Rogers in Kingston, Jamaica.